The first concept that I want to talk about today is the Swiss cheese model, which is a patient safety model. This is one of the principles that are used in risk analysis and in risk management, and it is a principle behind what is known as layered security. Every system has several subparts, and these subparts have to function together in order to make the system work. Now, what happens is if each of these subparts are imperfect, they will probably have defects in them, which is analogous to the holes in the Swiss cheese. Now, usually what happens is even if an error passes through one subpart of the system, it usually gets held up against the next subpart. Sort of like the holes in different layers of the Swiss cheese never lining up together. But think about what happens if all these holes were to line up. It takes only one instance where all these holes will line up, they will be in perfect alignment, and the error will pass through these holes, and it will result in a disaster. Right. So this is exactly how errors happen in the healthcare system as well. So think about an example of medication administration in healthcare. So the first layer of the Swiss cheese, so to speak, is probably prescribing the medication. The second layer is preparing the medication. The third layer is administering the medication, probably. So if usually if there is a prescribing error, that may get caught at the preparing stage. Now, if something goes wrong in the preparing stage, that may get caught in the administering stage. But what if the error in prescribing never gets caught? That means all the holes will have lined up, all the defects in each of these layers of the system will have lined up, and the wrong medication reaches the patient. So one way to understand this is that different layers of the system have different defects in them, which is the holes, and the larger the holes, the more the scope for error, and the more the number of holes, the more the scope for error. So you need to fix different layers of the system in order to prevent errors, and you also need to make sure that each layer in the system is made robust enough and it is made error proof enough so that errors never happen. So that is the Swiss cheese model. The second concept, again from patient safety, and actually this is about organizational culture. Actually, this is a model for determining culpability of unsafe acts. It is again given by James Reason, and organizations always talk about having a just and accountable culture in the organization. That means having a no blame culture. This goes with the principle that 85% of all the errors that happen are system related, and only 15% are people related. So, but usually what happens is people get blamed for errors that happen in the system. So sometimes the systems are not set up properly for people to do their jobs. So how do you determine whenever an error happens, or whenever an unsafe act happens, how do you determine whether people were actually culpable or not, or whether it is a system problem? So James Reason actually developed this framework that helps us to analyze any unsafe act and decide if a person is responsible for it, or if it is a system failure. So these are the questions that you go through. The first question you have to ask is, were the actions as intended by the person? If not, was the person using some unauthorized substance? If not, was it done knowingly? Was a safe operating procedure knowingly violated? If not, does it pass the substitution test, meaning another person in a similar circumstance with the similar amount of experience and competency, would he or she have done the same thing? So that is the substitution test. And if not, then does this person have a history of unsafe acts? And so if you answer yes to the first question on the left, then you have to also ask the question, if the actions were as intended, were the consequences as intended as well? If you answer yes to both questions, that means it was a deliberate act of that person, which is usually very rare in healthcare. People intentionally trying to harm themselves or others is very, very rare. Now, the second is if the person is under the influence of unauthorized substances like maybe alcohol or illegal drugs, etc., you have to then ask, was it required due to a medical condition? For example, some drugs, morphine, etc., was it required by a medical condition? If not, then that means it is an intentional substance abuse case. So there is no mitigation. That means there is, there is no justification for the person having used that. Now, if it is because of a medical condition, probably it is an overdose. So there it is substance abuse with mitigation. So you will have to take necessary corrective actions based on the conclusion that you reach here. Now, if the person had knowingly violated safe operating procedures, then you have to ask the question, were these procedures available for the person to review? Are they practically applicable? And is it, is it common sense enough to people to understand to how to apply it? And are they the right procedures to be followed in the first place? If all of these are yes, then probably it was a reckless behavior on the part of the person. And if it was not, that means it's a system failure, because the procedures that we set up were never right. Okay, and then you have to also ask the next question, which is about the substitution test. If you put another person under similar circumstances with similar amount of competency, would he or she have done the same thing? If the answer is no, that means this particular person in question had some deficiencies in training and selection, or probably just inexperience. And if that is not the case, then that is a negligent error. And if it is the case, then again it is a system induced error, because you did not train properly. The system, that is, the system did not train properly or did not select properly, or it is because of inexperience, right? And if the person has a history of unsafe acts, then corrective training and counseling will be required for the person. If the person doesn't have history of unsafe acts, if this is the first time, then it is a blameless error. So as you go from left to right, the culpability of the person, or the guilt, so to speak, of the person goes on reducing. So this is a decision tree that can be used for determining culpability. Remember, a blame-free culture doesn't mean a scot-free culture, meaning people cannot get away with wrongdoing if they are found to be culpable. So that is where James Reason's model is really helpful for organizations to understand.